It was a typical Tuesday morning at the town's police station, where Officer David Thompson had just finished his shift. Known for his bad attitude and quick temper, Thompson had been with the department for over 8 years. He believed that his position gave him the right to treat people however he saw fit, especially those he thought didn't belong. His reputation among the other officers was mixed. Some were afraid of him, while others simply avoided him. That morning, he was sitting at the front desk, scrolling through his phone, when a black man walked into the station. He was well dressed in a sharp suit, with a confident stride. His name was Marcus Johnson, a former military officer who had recently moved to the town. Marcus had a calm demeanor and seemed unbothered by the occasional glances of the people in the station. He walked up to the counter, where Officer Thompson was seated, and asked to speak with someone in charge about a minor issue. Thompson looked up from his phone, sizing Marcus up. For a moment, his usual arrogance took over, and without thinking, he stood up and said, "What's your business here? I'm sure you've got the wrong place." His words were cold and dismissive, meant to assert his control over the situation. Marcus, unfazed by the officer's tone, calmly replied, "I just need to speak with the chief. It's about a small issue, but I need it handled quickly." Thompson's irritation grew, fueled by something that wasn't immediately clear to anyone around him. As Marcus stood there, still calm and composed, Thompson began to feel a sense of powerlessness. He wasn't used to people not being intimidated by him, especially not black men. His thoughts shifted, and without a second thought, he looked at Marcus and sneered. "You think you belong here, don't you?" Marcus didn't react to the insult. Instead, he maintained eye contact and said, "I'm here for a reason, and I'm not leaving until I speak to someone in charge." Thompson, believing he could intimidate Marcus like he had done with others in the past, walked closer. He raised his voice slightly. "You need to leave now. You're causing a scene, and I'm not going to let you make a mockery of this place." Marcus stood his ground, not flinching, even as the officer's words grew more hostile. But before things could escalate further, a shift in the air seemed to happen. Other officers who had been quietly observing the interaction looked at each other, unsure of how to step in. Then, something happened that no one saw coming. Officer Thompson, still fuming, spat on the ground near Marcus. His action, though meant to intimidate, was reckless and fueled by his deep-rooted biases. He hadn't expected the man standing before him to remain so calm, nor did he expect the tension to build so quickly. Marcus looked down at the spit, then back at Thompson, but said nothing. Instead, he calmly turned around and walked toward the chief's office, where he was greeted with a surprise that would change everything. As Marcus walked past the other officers, their looks of curiosity shifted to shock as they overheard a loud announcement over the intercom. "We'd like to welcome our new chief of police, Marcus Johnson, who will officially start today." The room went silent. The officers, including Thompson, froze in place as they realized the man they had been disrespecting was not just another citizen. He was the new chief of police, the very person they all now had to report to. Thompson's face went pale. He could feel the weight of his mistake crashing down on him. He had just spit at the new chief, the man who was now in charge of the entire police force. As Marcus entered the office, the entire room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The realization hit hard. Officer Thompson's actions had consequences far beyond what he had imagined. The surprise had only just begun. The news about Marcus Johnson being the new chief of police spread quickly through the station. Officers exchanged nervous glances as they whispered among themselves. The air, once filled with the usual chatter and light-hearted jokes, was now tense and full of uncertainty. They had all seen Marcus walk into the building, but none of them had connected the dots. The calm, collected man in front of them was now their new boss. Marcus, however, wasn't fazed by the sudden shift in atmosphere. He had seen this kind of behavior before in his military days, where people would test the boundaries of authority and leadership. What had happened at the front desk was a reminder of how some people still judged others based on stereotypes. The difference now was that he held the power, and he intended to use it wisely. As he walked into the office, Marcus could feel the weight of the stairs on his back. But he kept his head high, focused on the task at hand. He had worked hard to get to where he was, and this new role wasn't about proving a point to anyone. It was about making a real difference in the community. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson stood frozen in place, his mind racing. The spit he had directed at Marcus earlier seemed to haunt him now. He regretted his actions, but it was too late to take them back. He had crossed a line, and there was no undoing it. But what bothered him the most was the realization that Marcus hadn't reacted with anger or hostility. Instead, he had kept his cool and walked away, something Thompson hadn't expected. As the other officers continued to adjust to the shock of the announcement, Marcus sat behind the desk in his new office. He didn't waste any time. He started reviewing files and paperwork, preparing for his first day as chief. His focus was unwavering, but his mind couldn't help but replay the events at the front desk. He wondered how someone who was supposed to serve and protect could act with such prejudice. But rather than dwell on it, he made a silent promise to himself. He would create an environment where everyone felt respected and valued, regardless of who they were. Thompson, meanwhile, stood in the hallway, wrestling with his thoughts. He knew he had made a huge mistake. He had let his anger and assumptions cloud his judgment, and now he would have to face the consequences. What he didn't know was what Marcus would do next. Would he seek revenge? Would he bring it up in front of the entire force? Or would he simply let it go and move on? The silence in the station was deafening as the day went on. No one dared to approach Marcus yet. The other officers were waiting for some kind of direction, unsure of how to act in the presence of their new chief. But Marcus didn't seem to care for any of the formalities. He was focused on the work at hand, and that was all that mattered. He wasn't concerned with revenge or proving a point. He was focused on leading the force with integrity. As the hours passed, Marcus made his rounds. He spoke with each officer, listening to their concerns and offering advice where needed. His approach was calm and respectful, the same way he had handled himself all his life. The officers, slowly but surely, began to see the man behind the uniform. They began to understand that Marcus wasn't just their new boss. He was someone who genuinely cared about their well-being and the community they served. But there was one officer who still hadn't come to terms with what had happened earlier, Officer Thompson. As he watched Marcus interact with his colleagues, he couldn't help but feel ashamed. He knew he had to make amends, but he didn't know how. Would Marcus ever forgive him? Would he take action against him? The uncertainty weighed heavily on Thompson's mind. Little did he know, Marcus had already made his decision. He wasn't going to hold a grudge. He was determined to lead with fairness and respect, and he believed everyone deserved a second chance, even those who had wronged him. The question now was whether Thompson was ready to change, or if he would remain trapped in his own biases. As the day came to a close, the first real challenge of Marcus's leadership had begun. It wasn't about enforcing rules or cracking down on crime. It was about rebuilding trust and setting an example for the men and women under his command. And Marcus was ready to do just that. The days following Marcus Johnson's appointment as chief of police were tense. Officers were still adjusting to the change in leadership, and there was an air of uncertainty around the station. Some were excited about the new direction Marcus promised to take, while others felt skeptical about his ability to lead, given the challenges he would face. But no one could deny that Marcus had made an immediate impact. On the first morning after his promotion, Marcus had gathered the team for a meeting. The room was filled with the usual officers, some young and eager to prove themselves, others seasoned veterans who had seen it all. There was a quiet hum of conversation as everyone took their seats, unsure of what to expect. When Marcus entered the room, all conversations stopped. He walked in with confidence, dressed in his uniform, his expression calm but focused. His presence alone commanded respect. As he stood in front of the officers, he didn't start with a speech. Instead, he looked each one of them in the eye. "Thank you all for being here today," Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. "We are going to work together as a team. This isn't just about enforcing the law. It's about making sure every person in this community feels safe and heard. It's about building trust, and that starts with you. I expect nothing less than respect and professionalism from each of you." The room was silent. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His words were enough. He wasn't here to play games or try to prove something. He was here to lead with integrity, and it was clear that he wanted the same from everyone in the room. As the meeting progressed, Marcus laid out his vision for the department. He talked about increasing community outreach, improving relationships with local organizations, and setting up new training programs for officers. He emphasized the importance of fairness and respect. He didn't ignore the challenges the department faced but acknowledged them, offering solutions to move forward. One officer, a young recruit named Officer Carter, raised his hand during the meeting. "Chief Johnson, how do you plan to address the concerns some of us have about working with certain officers who may not fully support your approach?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Marcus nodded thoughtfully before responding. "Change is never easy, Officer Carter. But change is necessary. We will work together to bridge any gaps. Those who resist will have to answer for their actions, but we will be fair and give everyone the chance to prove themselves." The room was quiet, and for a moment, there was a sense of unity. Marcus's words had struck a chord with everyone in the room. The officers weren't just hearing a new plan. They were hearing someone who truly cared about the department and the community they served. As the meeting wrapped up, Marcus made one final statement. "I want you to remember this. We are not just law enforcement. We are a part of this community, and our job is to protect and serve with honor." The officers left the meeting feeling inspired. Many were still uncertain about how things would unfold under Marcus's leadership, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to allow anyone to remain complacent. He expected more from them, and in return, he would provide guidance and support. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson, who had been avoiding Marcus for days, was still struggling with his previous actions. He hadn't been able to shake the memory of the moment when he had spat in Marcus's direction, unaware of who he really was. Now he found himself facing an even bigger challenge: earning Marcus's trust. Thompson knew he had to make things right. The thought of continuing on in the department without addressing his mistake felt impossible. He had to find a way to apologize, but he wasn't sure if Marcus would be willing to listen. But what Marcus didn't know was that Thompson had already taken the first step. He had started reading more about the community he served, working to understand the real issues, and listening to colleagues he had once ignored. It was clear that Thompson was starting to change, even if he hadn't admitted it yet. Marcus's leadership was already having an effect on the department, and it was clear that the journey ahead would be one of change, not just for him, but for everyone around him. The challenge now was whether the officers would rise to the occasion or remain stuck in the past. But as Marcus prepared for the road ahead, he knew that the greatest strength of any leader wasn't just their ability to command. It was their willingness to help others grow. Days passed, and the atmosphere at the police station began to shift. Chief Marcus Johnson's leadership style was different from what the officers were used to, but it was exactly what the department needed. His approach was firm but fair, and for the first time in a while, officers felt like their voices were being heard. Yet, there was still tension in the air. Officer Thompson, who had been part of the team that confronted Marcus that day, couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. He had been one of the officers who had shouted at Marcus, and it weighed heavily on him. Thompson had spent nights thinking about that moment when he treated his new chief with disrespect. He knew that his actions were out of line, but he wasn't sure how to make it right. One morning, as Marcus prepared to leave for work, he received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was Officer Thompson, standing at the door, looking unsure of himself. "Chief Johnson," Thompson began, his voice hesitant, "I want to apologize for the way I acted in front of you, and I know I can't take back what happened, but I'm asking for your forgiveness." Marcus looked up from his desk, surprised but calm. He could tell that Thompson was sincere. It wasn't easy to admit mistakes, especially for someone in law enforcement, but Marcus appreciated the officer's honesty. He knew that earning the respect of his team would take time, but this was a step in the right direction. "Officer Thompson, I respect that you've come to me to make things right. We all make mistakes. What matters is that we learn from them. I believe in second chances, but it's your actions moving forward that will speak louder than words." Thompson nodded, relieved by Marcus's response. "I'll do my best to prove that I can be part of this change," he said, determination in his voice. As the days went on, Marcus continued to focus on his goal of creating a department built on respect, professionalism, and fairness. He introduced more community outreach programs and started organizing team-building activities for the officers. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere at the station began to shift from one of distrust to cooperation. Officers who had been skeptical of Marcus's leadership were beginning to see the positive changes in the department. But there was still one person who hadn't yet warmed up to Marcus: Officer Daniels. Daniels was an older officer, set in his ways, and he had been part of the group that had resisted Marcus' promotion from the beginning. He was reluctant to accept the changes Marcus was bringing, and he often voiced his concerns to his colleagues. Daniels still believed that things should stay the way they always had been. One day, Marcus decided to address the elephant in the room. He called a department-wide meeting, where he asked everyone to come together and share their thoughts. It was an opportunity for open dialogue, and Marcus knew that this could be a turning point for the department. The room fell silent as Marcus spoke. "I know that change can be difficult," he said, his voice steady. "But we can't move forward if we're not willing to adapt. Our mission is to serve and protect, and that starts with how we treat each other as officers. I need all of you to work with me, not against me. Together, we can make this department the best it's ever been." There was a pause before Officer Daniels spoke up, his voice thick with hesitation. "I understand what you're saying, Chief. I'm just not sure if I'm ready for all these changes. It's not easy to let go of old habits." Marcus nodded. "I get that, Daniels. Change isn't easy for anyone. But I believe in your ability to grow, just like I believe in everyone else here. We're all in this together." The tension in the room was palpable. It was clear that Daniels was struggling to accept the changes Marcus was pushing for, but there was also a sense of respect beginning to form. Marcus didn't demand instant loyalty. He understood that trust had to be earned, and that it would take time. That day, as the meeting came to a close, a small but significant shift took place. Marcus had proven that he wasn't just a leader who barked orders. He was someone who was willing to listen, to give second chances, and to guide his team through difficult times. And little by little, the department began to trust him more. As for Officer Thompson, he continued to make strides in regaining his colleagues' respect. He worked hard to prove that he was committed to Marcus's vision of a better, more unified department. It wasn't going to be easy, but with each passing day, the officers were learning to trust each other again. The journey toward change was long, but Marcus knew it was worth every step. He believed in the power of leadership, and more importantly, he believed in the potential of his team. Weeks passed, and Chief Marcus Johnson's efforts began to show results. The police department had started to come together in ways no one had anticipated. Officers who were once skeptical of his leadership were now beginning to see the positive changes Marcus was making. There was still work to do, but the atmosphere was much more cooperative. One particular incident stood out. It was late one evening, and there had been a call about a disturbance at a local bar. Officers were sent to handle the situation, but when they arrived, they were confronted with a larger crowd than expected. Tensions were running high, and a few officers began to lose their patience. As the situation escalated, Officer Daniels, who had been struggling with Marcus's leadership, stepped in. He had been one of the officers who had shown the most resistance to change, but tonight was different. He kept calm and began speaking to the crowd in a calm, authoritative voice. He diffused the situation, preventing things from getting out of hand. As Marcus arrived at the scene, he watched in silence, impressed. Daniels, the officer who had once doubted him, was handling the situation with the poise of someone who had finally understood what it meant to be a part of a team. The respect between Daniels and Marcus had grown, and it was clear that Daniels was starting to embrace the changes Marcus had been advocating. After the incident, Marcus called Officer Daniels into his office. He didn't want to just let this moment pass without acknowledging it. Daniels entered, looking nervous but proud of what he had done. "You handled that situation well tonight," Marcus said, offering a genuine smile. "You kept your cool, and you did exactly what needed to be done. That's what it means to be a part of this team." Daniels looked down for a moment, a little embarrassed. "I didn't want to let you down, Chief. I wasn't sure at first, but I see now that the changes you're making are for the good of the department." Marcus nodded. "It's not always easy, but I believe that each of you has the potential to do great things. It's about trust and teamwork. Tonight, you showed me that you're willing to put the past behind and move forward with us." Daniel smiled, the weight of his past reluctance lifting. "Thank you, Chief. I'll keep doing my best." The conversation between the two men was a pivotal moment in the department's journey. It was not just a victory for Daniels, but for the entire police force. It showed that even the hardest hearts could change, and that leadership wasn't about forcing compliance. It was about understanding, guidance, and allowing people to grow. Meanwhile, Officer Thompson continued to work on rebuilding relationships with his colleagues. After the apology he had made to Marcus, his efforts to make amends were visible. He took the time to listen to his fellow officers, offering help when needed, and showing that he was committed to making things right. Over time, he earned the respect of his peers, and his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. At the next department meeting, Marcus addressed everyone with a sense of pride. "I'm proud of the progress we've made," he began. "But we are not done yet. We're building something stronger, something better. And it's not just about me. It's about all of us working together." The officers responded with a sense of unity that had been missing for so long. The changes were becoming real. The department wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but they were no longer divided. They were a team. For Marcus, the journey had been long, but it was worth every struggle. He knew that true leadership wasn't about authority. It was about inspiring others to be their best selves. And that's exactly what he was doing. As he walked out of the meeting room, he caught sight of Officer Daniels, who gave him a respectful nod. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. It was a sign that things were finally starting to fall into place. Marcus smiled to himself, knowing that the hard work was paying off, and that the department was on the path to becoming the best version of itself. One morning, Marcus sat at his desk in the chief's office, reviewing reports from the previous day. The department was beginning to run more smoothly, but there were still areas where improvements were needed. He knew that despite the progress, he had to keep pushing for more change. He couldn't afford to become complacent. As he was about to call a meeting with the officers, a knock interrupted his thoughts. Officer Daniels walked in with a file in hand. "Morning, Chief. I've got something to show you," Daniels said with a grin. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" Daniels handed him the file. "It's about the new community outreach program we've been planning. I think we're ready to take it public." Marcus smiled, impressed by Daniels' initiative. Over the past few weeks, Daniels had really stepped up, contributing new ideas to improve community relations. The outreach program was designed to build trust with the public, a goal Marcus had emphasized since day one. "This looks great, Daniels. Let's get started as soon as possible," Marcus replied, glancing over the plans. Before they could discuss further, another officer, Officer Ramirez, walked in with some new updates on the department's training programs. She, too, had been inspired to push for improvements, and her work was helping ensure the department was well equipped to handle various situations. It was clear to Marcus that the changes he had been advocating for were not just taking root. They were growing. As they discussed the details, Marcus's phone rang. It was an emergency call about a situation developing downtown. There had been reports of a violent altercation outside a local business, and the situation was quickly escalating. Marcus's heart sank. This was exactly the type of incident that could undo all the work they had done so far. He quickly gathered his team. "Let's move out. We need to handle this carefully," he said, his voice calm but firm. The officers quickly moved into action. Marcus, now leading the team, felt the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. The work he had done to rebuild the department and restore its integrity had brought them to this moment. Now it was time to show the public that change was real. When they arrived on the scene, the situation was tense. The crowd was loud, and the few officers already there were struggling to maintain control. Marcus quickly assessed the scene, scanning the area for any signs of danger or aggression. "Stay calm, everyone. We don't want things to get worse," Marcus said, stepping forward to speak with the crowd. His voice carried authority, but there was a sense of genuine care in his words. He wasn't just an officer in charge. He was someone who truly cared about the people he served. The crowd quieted down as Marcus spoke, his calm demeanor starting to have an effect. Officer Daniels and Officer Ramirez moved through the crowd, offering assistance where needed, while Marcus continued to de-escalate the situation with his presence. Slowly, the tension began to dissipate. The crowd became more cooperative, and the situation was resolved without violence. Once the scene was under control, Marcus turned to his team. "Great work, everyone. This is what we've been working for." The officers nodded, pride evident in their expressions. They had just handled a potentially dangerous situation with professionalism and care, exactly what Marcus had been trying to instill in them from the beginning. As the officers returned to the station, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had faced resistance, challenges, and setbacks. But today, he saw that the department had become stronger, more united, and more capable of handling the tough situations that came their way. His journey wasn't over, but for the first time, Marcus felt confident that they were on the right path. The department had come a long way from where it had started, and he knew that with continued dedication, they would continue to improve and build trust within the community. Marcus smiled to himself as he walked into the station. He had fought hard for this, and now he was beginning to see the results. He had a team he could count on, and more importantly, the community was starting to believe in them again. It was a victory, but Marcus knew there was still much more work to be done. The days following the successful handling of the downtown altercation were filled with a sense of accomplishment. Marcus Johnson's leadership was finally beginning to shape the department into something new, a place where officers worked together, trusted each other, and above all, respected the community they served. But while the progress was clear, Marcus knew there was still much to do. The next week, he decided to hold a special meeting with all the officers to talk about the future. He wanted to gather everyone's thoughts on the recent changes, as well as address any concerns they had. Marcus knew that real change didn't just happen from the top down. It had to involve everyone in the department. The meeting room was filled with officers, some of whom had been with the department for years, and others who were just starting their careers. Marcus stood at the front of the room, his posture relaxed yet authoritative. He began by acknowledging the hard work the officers had put in over the past few months. "I know things haven't always been easy, and I know that change takes time," Marcus began, looking around the room at his team. "But we've made a lot of progress together. We've improved our relationships with the community, and we've built trust among each other. And I want to continue that progress. But to do that, I need your input. We're in this together." A quiet murmur ran through the room as officers shifted in their seats, thinking about what Marcus had said. Then, Officer Ramirez, who had been one of the strongest supporters of the changes, raised her hand. "Chief, I think we've made great strides, but we need to keep the momentum going. The community outreach programs are working, but we should expand them. There are still neighborhoods that feel disconnected from the police. We need to go to them, not just wait for them to come to us." Marcus nodded, appreciating her input. You're absolutely right, Officer Ramirez. We can't just wait for people to come to us. We need to be proactive. I'll work with you to expand our outreach efforts. But I want everyone's ideas. This is a team effort. Officer Daniels, who had grown more comfortable with the changes, added, I agree with Ramirez. Also, I think we should start focusing more on training, especially when it comes to handling sensitive situations. It's important that we're always prepared to approach things the right way. Marcus smiled, proud of the officer's commitment to the changes. I've been thinking the same thing. We need to invest in our training. We have to stay ahead of the curve, not just react to situations. We'll work on implementing more comprehensive training that focuses on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and conflict resolution. It'll be an ongoing process, but we're all in this together. The meeting continued, with each officer offering suggestions and ideas. As the discussion went on, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The team was engaged, eager to make a difference, and most importantly, they were working together to create positive change. It wasn't about one person. It was about the collective effort of the entire department. Later that week, Marcus began making the necessary arrangements to expand the outreach programs. He also reached out to a few training organizations to start developing new courses for his officers. The department was on the right track, and Marcus was determined to keep moving forward. The shift in the department was becoming evident not just within the station, but also in the community. People were beginning to see the changes. Complaints about police misconduct had decreased, and more citizens were coming forward with praise for the police's efforts to build trust and rapport. Marcus received messages from local organizations, thanking him for his commitment to making the town a safer and more welcoming place. But it wasn't just the community that was noticing. Officer Thompson, who had once made the grave mistake of disrespecting Marcus, was becoming a role model for the younger officers. His transformation was remarkable. He was no longer the officer who harbored resentment or anger. Instead, he was someone who took the time to mentor new recruits, teaching them the importance of respect, empathy, and teamwork. As the days turned into weeks, the department's efforts began to pay off. Officers were more confident in their roles, the community was more trusting, and Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. He knew that change wasn't something that happened overnight, but every day brought them closer to their goal. The journey had been long, but Marcus felt confident that the department was on the right path. With every challenge, they grew stronger, and with every victory, no matter how small, Marcus was reminded that true leadership wasn't about power. It was about inspiring others to do better and be better.